series. My name is Christina Hamilton, the series director. We made it, folks. Happy first full day of spring. Yeah. I'm super excited about it. It's been a while. And I'm very excited that today we present the extraordinary American director, Peter Sellars, a longtime wish for this program. So very pleased he's in the house. And a big thank you to our partners today, the Prison Creative Arts Project, and good deal. And the University Musical Society. Yeah, another huge deal. Many of you likely saw Sellars' production earlier at the beginning of the year in January, Lagrime di San Pietro, which UMS produced. So we're pleased we can give you a deeper experience on that today. And there's still many offerings to come in the UMS calendar, so do check out ums.org and get some tickets. Another part of Peter's visit to U of M today has been to spend time with our other partner, the Prison Creative Arts Project, which brings those impacted by the justice system and the University of Michigan community into artistic collaboration. It was founded in 1990 with just a single theater workshop and has grown vastly and includes courses, exhibits, publications, arts programming, and other events, and reaches thousands and thousands of people each year. Currently, they are exhibiting the 24th annual exhibition of art by Michigan prisoners, which opened last night at the Duderstadt Center. This is the largest prison art exhibition in the world. It's highlighting the work of 574 artists from 26 facilities just right here in the state of Michigan. It features 670 paintings, sculptures, and three-dimensional works, so you should definitely take your time and go check it out. It is open now through April 3rd. They have a number of events, panel discussions and talks coming up. There's one this Sunday at 11 a.m. with artists from previous Prison Creative Arts Project exhibitions, sharing their stories and answering questions about life as a prison artist. And then on Monday evening at 6 p.m., they have 3 visitors from Australia, the Orana Arts Organization in Australia, speaking about their work with incarcerated artists there. And that's 6 p.m. on Monday evening, also at the Duderstadt Center in the midst of a wonderful exhibition. Next week, the Ann Arbor Film Festival is happening here at the Michigan Theater. Get your passes, it's a great week. And just for all you Penny Stamps regulars, in the Penny Stamps brochure, we didn't know who we were presenting Film Festival Week, so it wasn't printed in there. We have now figured it out. It's the Meow Wolf Art Collective coming in from Santa Fe, New Mexico. They are wild, I promise you. They create interactive experiences that transport audiences into fantastic realms of storytelling and exploration. So don't miss that here as part of the Film Festival and the Penny Stamps next Thursday at 5:10. Please do remember to turn off your cell phones. We will have a Q&A today right here in the theater. You'll see microphones at the ends of the aisles of these 2 center aisles here. So when the time comes, you can come up and ask your questions. And there's also books for sale in the lobby. U of M Press is here with a new book of Peter's that they have just published. So, and Peter is so fabulous, he's going to be willing to sign your books afterwards. So we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll have a book signing in the lobby as well. So to introduce Peter Sellars today, we have another special visitor to the University of Michigan from UCLA, currently an artist in residence at the Residential College with the Prison Creative Arts Project and the Dance Department. He has an ongoing connection to our guest today, and in the spring, he will co-teach Art as Moral Action, the Art as Moral Action course at UCLA with Peter Sellars. So please welcome Andrew Martinez.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, everyone. I am thrilled to introduce Peter Sellars to Michigan and to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Tonight's lecture is the first of a new partnership between the Prison Creative Arts Project and the Penny Stamps lecture series. Peter Sellars is an internationally lauded theater, opera, and festival director, and part of his story has been newly published in The Passions of Peter Sellars by Susan McClary, as you might have seen coming in through the lobby. Art as Moral Action is not only the title of tonight's talk, but it is also the title of Peter's veteran course at UCLA. Art as Moral Action is also an invitation to explore and celebrate the social and moral function of art. Peter is most qualified to extend this invite and very generous to bring his insight to the Prison Creative Arts Project and to the Penny Stamps Mantle. Please help me welcome Peter Sellars.
Hi, Andy. Nice to see you. Oh, my God. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see everyone. Hello. It's so cool to be here. What I would like to do is just talk about a few things, but if I'm saying something that's super annoying, please come up and stop me, all right? Stop me before I kill again. These microphones are right here, and you've just got to use them, and we need to turn this into a dialogue form as soon as possible, like some other structures we know that need to be turned into dialogue form as soon as possible, right? Hello. We really do not believe in one-way communication, right? Because if communication is only moving in one direction, it cannot actually be called communication. That is called oppression. So what we're talking about is structures of reciprocity. We're talking about structures where things are moving in multiple directions at any given moment. By definition, it's alive, it's dynamic, it's changing, it's inviting change, it's creating change, and it is about not making something alone, but doing what we're doing together. It's about coalition building. It's about moving beyond our selfishness. What does it mean to work together with people? And particularly people you disagree with. Particularly, quote unquote, your enemies. Because nobody's friends list is actually good enough. We all have to get way more sophisticated about who our friends are. And if you're going through life just being with people you like and who like you, or even going to theater that you like, and if you haven't noticed God did not create the world based on what you like, hello, that is not a very interesting filter to approach life through. In fact, a lot of things you don't like and a lot of people you don't like are very important to include in your life. That's why theater was invented. Please, it's about inclusiveness. It's about acknowledging we're all here, and it's about making a place for everyone. Where everybody is invited, welcomed, and not judged. Right now, the crisis in the world is the sharing of space. How do we share space? One of the things we're not very good at in our super high technology universe is what are the technologies of sharing? We are so primitive in the technologies of sharing. We're very advanced in the technology of this belongs to me. And that is pathetic because nothing ever belonged to you, ever. Everything any of us has ever received is a gift. And you're alive because of so many gifts. Every thought you have is a gift from someone. Every feeling you have is a gift from someone or from histories of people. My friend Guillermo Gomez Peña always says when he was writing in his diary, in a cafe in Mexico City, he has to sip his cappuccino and remember 25 generations of campesinos in his family, working in the fields before dawn and after sunset, so that he can taste his cappuccino and write in a notebook. If he's not speaking for and with them. And if when he opens his mouth, it's not their voice coming out, something's wrong. And needless to say, now is the time to speak with and on behalf of the unborn, people who are not here yet. Because as long as we're making our decision about what the planet looks like today, that is short-term thinking. The arts were invented to encourage long-term thinking. We're doing Shakespeare and Aeschylus because everything on the planet is undead. Our ancestors are here. Our descendants are here, all right now. Art is about creating the space that we share our lives with the people who were on earth before and the people who are coming. And we create a space that includes them all, welcomes them all. We're living in a time of the greatest income disparity in human history. And in a country whose great promise is based on equality. At this moment, we're living in the most unequal society ever imagined. At this moment, right now. Our task as artists is to create structures of equality and structures of sharing. How do we share the water, the air, the minerals, and the possibilities of every single human life? And how do we create equality as a structural experience? Obviously, we're in a period where the failures that surround us are failures of imagination. No one can imagine anything better. And you say, are you kidding? You really can't think of something better than that? And that is because the arts have been removed from the national menu. And the idea that a human being's most important function on earth is to be imaginative. And we're all here to do not what happened before, but something has never happened yet. That's why we are on earth, because something is waiting to happen that has not happened ever before. And it needs new ideas, new people, new ways of thinking, new ways of being together, new ways of organizing, new ways of taking pleasure, new ways in feeling our lives have purpose and meaning. Living in the absence of meaning is one of the crises at the moment. Obviously, the people who are finding meaning from life are the kids living in cages on the Texas border. Because when life hands you that amount of injustice, that amount of heartbreak, and the amount of sheer, perverse ugliness, that's when you start learning to look for beauty. You start learning to look for change. And you realize what the world needs is not more ugliness and not more anger, but more compassion, more understanding, more generosity, and more sharing, because the fate of the planet is something we all share now. Global warming has taken us to a place where finally what we're talking about knows no borders at all. Global warming has taken us to a place where it's not about what we have and what they have. It's about what the human race is facing. which is a thrilling new way to think in this generation, and why it's amazing to be alive right now and not in some previous period. And for people who are concerned with current politics here and think, oh my God, things have declined, I am sorry, there's not one nostalgic bone in my body. I do not wish I'd been alive in this earlier, because most things that we're really working on, hello, were never good ever. Can I just say that? And I really come to all this with not 1 ounce of nostalgia. I do not need to go back there ever, ever, ever. I want to go forward. Because nothing has been good enough yet. So let us press on. Now, when I'm talking about structures of equality, I want to just get very real and very specific with you guys so we have some real stuff to talk about. So I'm going to just mention 2 projects I'm in the middle of. One project I've done, but it kind of lingers in an important way, and it's a play by Euripides called The Children of Heracles. Has anybody heard of it? It's a little obscure. Most of the classic scholars, decided it was not even a play by Euripides because it's unusual. Now, of course, unusual is not a pejorative in my book. It's like, thank you, what a relief. That sounds like a sign of authenticity to me, not a sign that this is questionable. It was written 25 centuries ago about immigration in Athens. It's a very powerful work. It's a very complicated work. And I want to just describe a project that I made in 8 different countries about refugees and immigration using this play. We did it in England, in Spain, in Germany, in Holland, and in Paris, and the American Repertory Theater in Boston, in America. And I just want to explain a little bit of the shape of it, because for me, what we're here to do as artists is create a space that does not otherwise exist in the society. And my plea to the fabulous artists in this room tonight, hello, beautiful artists, good evening, hello artists, calling all artists, hello, calling all visionaries, yes, come in please, hello. Just to say, my theme is about creating these structures of equality, these structures where we can be together, these structures where we can recognize each other across deep divides. In the case of this play, I'll just describe briefly the play itself is about Hercules, who is the strongest man on earth. And as you know, he died at these horrible labors that were imposed on him by a very vicious king. And that already is a very powerful image that a lot of young people around the world recognize. Is your dad is the strongest guy on earth, and guess what? The system has destroyed him. You can be the strongest guy on earth, and the system will kill you. So many kids from so many parts of the world recognize that. Your dad is Hercules, and that wasn't enough. Once this dictator destroys Hercules, then Hercules' kids are there, and he says, oh my God, I'm not going to be safe as long as his kids are alive. So he sets out to murder all of Hercules' kids. Their grandmother gets them together, and they flee. And they start going to different countries asking for refuge. And this dictator sends a message to every country that if you let these kids in, we will declare war on you. And so they go to country after country and they're turned away at the border. And when these kids and their grandmother and grandfather show up, they're turned away until they get to Athens. And Athens says, we stand for freedom. We stand for refugees. We stand for people who need to begin their life again. We stand for people who need to be protected at the altar of a higher principle. And then the messenger shows up. And the Athenians have to say, okay, is it worth entering into a war with this vicious country? For the rights of these kids, are we willing to sacrifice the lives of our kids? That's the debate of the play. For me, the very important thing, one of the things that Euripides does that's theatrically quite moving, is he has the kids sitting on stage all night looking at the audience. But like all kids in immigration hearings, they're not allowed to speak for themselves. Adults speak, and the kids are silent while their lives are discussed and decisions are made. Euripides, 2,500 years ago, had those kids sit silently looking at the audience. So step one was to get those kids. So what we did in each of the 8 countries was get kids without papers from detention centers and bring them to the theater for that evening so they could sit there. And one of the first projects, of course, was getting dinner, food for people who are eating horrible food in detention centers. And just say their participation in an art project should mean they are treated as human beings, they're surrounded by love, and they eat a good meal. So step one was to get in every theater beautiful food, organized. But the other thing that was going on in every theater every night was another dinner simultaneously. What I tried to do is make a first part of the evening that went before the play of Euripides, in which somebody in the immigration chain of command, the interior minister, an immigration judge, a border guard, a head of a detention center, all these people who are the people who immigrants and refugees deal with. And then every night to have people without papers in dialogue before the performance. For me, it's one of the most intense things that, as you know, a border hearing on the southern border of the United States right now is legally has to be 35 seconds long. That is the current length of hearing for people coming across the border from Mexico. They have 35 seconds with a judge. And of course, you can only get into America if you tell one of the 3 stories that we accept. And I would say the same for Europe. Meanwhile, those stories are not most people's stories, but we don't actually want to hear the stories of people's real lives. So the immigration judges, for example, have a whole list of things they have to check off. So even whatever they feel from this person who's in front of them, their own feelings are not important because there's a mandatory list they have to check off. So in the 35 seconds or 35 minutes that a refugee and a judge are meeting, both sides are lying to each other when lives are in the balance. So for me, it was important to use theater to create a space for honesty. What would happen if this refugee could tell their real story and who they really are and what they're really dealing with? And what would happen if the immigration judge could be a human being and respond as a human being, not just as an official? So we had these dialogues between people with power and people with no power for 1 hour before every show. It was the first hour of the show. And to try and make a space that right now doesn't exist in the world. A space where instead of lying on both sides, we could have a moment of honesty. That was very complicated to arrange in all 8 countries, but we found strategies. Strategy number 1 was dinner. To have the interior minister of Austria have dinner before they went out to see the audience with 2 Nigerian immigrants living on the streets of Vienna with no papers. What does it mean when the interior minister is having dinner with 2 homeless people? Dinner, of course, is the way we all become human. It's just breaking bread is the actual thing we do together as human beings. An actual structure of equality is eating with people. It's one of the most ancient structures of equality and hospitality. In the first 10 minutes, we gradually found out that the interior minister had daughters, and so did the Nigerians. And they could talk about their daughters. The food was very delicious. And then they went out in front of an audience. But they had already met each other over dinner. So the nature of the conversation was very different from a conversation you would see on television, a conversation that's on the news, but actually had all these other types of vectors, which were only possible when people begin to be able to talk as equals. I don't want to personally take too much responsibility except to say those 2 guys did get their Austrian citizenship 1 year later. Because when you meet the Minister of the Interior, something happens. And that's one of the great things about being an artist, is we can be in the morning in a corporate boardroom, we can be in the afternoon with the chief of police, and we can be that night with gang members in a neighborhood. Because as artists, we can move through the society in a way most people could never dream of. And we're the people who can link the parts of society that don't talk to each other, don't see each other, don't understand each other, and certainly have never met face to face. And what does it mean to create that shared space where as soon as you meet people face to face, as soon as you have a real experience with them instead of looking at them on television, there's another definition of humanity, both for them and for you. The play itself was very, very intense, and it followed this hour-long dialogue. I invited people from the media to be the Greek chorus, newspaper reporters, television reporters, so they were on stage as the Greek chorus, which of course are interrogating the characters. But what that meant was we got this project in the media. So for example, in Paris, we had 3 pages in Le Monde, 4 pages in Libération, and every one of these kids who were brought from a detention center had their full biography printed in Le Monde. So nobody was a statistic, nobody was a number. People were human beings with histories, and these kids weren't just a number of kids. Every one of those kids could speak for themselves in the pages of Le Monde. So there was a way for the media to be part of the project. The play itself is devastating, really an overwhelming play, and it lets you know that we're no better at immigration than we were 2,500 years ago. But it put the issues forward with terrifying clarity, which is what Euripides did before he himself was exiled. One of the most powerful moments is when the Greeks finally do decide to let these kids in. And Euripides has this incredible moment where he has these kids go out into the audience. Once the Greeks have voted to let the refugees in, the kids leave the stage and go into the audience and say, "Thank you for letting me into your country. Thank you for letting me into your country. Thank you for letting me into your country." In every city, we had an incredible electricity in the room. Some people refused to touch those kids. Some people hissed or spit back or said, "You're not welcome here." Some people embraced. And you were in a moment where everybody realized where they were and where we are from just a simple moment of touching. And again, the problem not being an issue in a newspaper, but being touching you. Somebody reaching their hand to you, and you reach your hand back to them. The most basic human contact. And I would just say, in all the countries we worked in, it was very interesting. There's so many Homeland Security officials who came forward because they wanted to tell the truth, and they wanted to be human beings and not just be officials inside an incredibly oppressive, over-regulated system. And so we had so many willing participants who were border guards, who were going through things, who had their own real issues. So the people representing the system were amazingly open in country after country because they knew what they were doing did not feel right. Meanwhile, the people without papers were always in a complicated situation because they were subject to arrest in every country. Some theaters, we had to create a safe space in the basement of the building, and the refugees would speak to the audience on a microphone, over speakers, which was pretty incredible. One woman in Boston, Serbian woman, speaking, hidden in the basement of the building in the United States of America, afraid to show her face, said from the basement of the building, "I'm a little upset to see American flags everywhere now that I've come to America." She said, "In Serbia, when they started putting flags on everything is when the killings began." Another Afghani woman, speaking from the basement, said, "We do not want your money, we want your freedom." While the performance was going on, in most of the venues, we had a venue across the street. And at that venue, another set of refugees, in some cases the parents of the kids, were cooking. And when the audience finished the discussion with the interior minister or the immigration judge, went through the play by Euripides, there was a third part of the evening, which is we all crossed the street and had dinner together. And there was a third dinner in the evening. And this was food cooked by the refugees. And the audience all found themselves at tables with the refugee kids, who of course you just saw, but they couldn't speak. And of course you would be nervous about even going up to them at a bus stop and asking them. So suddenly everybody in the audience was having dinner with one of these kids kept in a detention center. And again, a place of equality, where everyone could talk freely and you could learn who they were, what they were doing in life, and how they imagined their future. So that's an example of a kind of project that I'm talking about, is how do we make structures of equality? How do we make structures that open us into a new set of relationships, that open us into direct contact instead of thinking about people as others? And how can we recognize ourselves genuinely transformed as we are in any kind of friendship when you open your life to someone? And your life, of course, becomes so much richer. And meanwhile, the process of sharing makes you realize we don't have to hold on to everything, but we can begin to live more generously. Theater is about, unlike film and unlike video, is about shared space. It's the space we're all in today. We're all sharing this space with real bodies and real people. For me, this culture of sharing, how do we get good at it? This is the project of the 21st century, is how do we now share? We have to get really good at it. We need practice. The arts are here to help us practice and to expand our social and moral horizon and deepen our sense of what we owe, what we have been given, and what we're here to give. And to create the atmosphere where generosity is perfectly normal. And the occasion for people to have private breakthroughs. I'll tell you one more Children of Heracles story from Holland. Queen Beatrix in Holland is really one of the most spectacular royal figures in Europe. She's a huge supporter of the arts and one smart woman. And I've gotten to know her over the years, and I was just thrilled. She said she would come for the opening night of the Children of Heracles project. And of course, with the right-wing governments that have been in Holland the last 15 years, that's saying a lot, because immigration has been used just absolutely in the eye of right-wing politics, there as everywhere. And so she said, okay, I'm coming to opening night. I don't know what it was about her entourage or security detail or whatever, but she did not appear in the auditorium at the very beginning of the evening. And so the kids were very upset. And so the kids went out there with microphones and they said, everything in Europe is, oh, we care about human rights, we care about you, but when it's time to really care, they all disappear and you're back in the detention center and you have no rights at all, and all they want to do is deport you. So thank you, Europe, liberal Europe. And said, the Queen said she'd be here and she's not even here. That's typical. Well, the Queen was there. And she was not amused. She was actually very irritated. So I went to see her at the intermission, and she was quite irritated. And she said, these young people have to realize they have no right to be in our country. They have no legal right at all, and they should be in their own countries. I said, oh my goodness. And the Queen was surrounded by some of her legal people and this, and oh, you know, that this is just a sad night. But she went back in for the second half of the show, the Euripides part of the evening. And at the end of it, she was really overwhelmed. And she said, of course I'm here for those children. At the end of the evening, she was there for the next 2.5 hours, making selfies and signing autographs with every one of the refugee kids and their families. And the next morning, we were the front page of every Dutch newspaper. And I guess what I'm saying is that that is what we do as artists. Is people go in one way and say, these kids have got to get out of here. And then people experience something that art opens. A door is opened. A door of possibility. A door of imagination. A door of inclusion. A door of compassion. A door of recognition opens. It's always been there. It's just been shut. What is the key to open the door? And that's what we're here for, is to find those keys together. And I just want to emphasize, as the Dalai Lama says, you have to be grateful for your enemies because they deepen your practice. We all have to just get way better at what we're doing. And I just have to emphasize, do not resent the fact that you have to engage in fundraising. Dear artists, thank God you have to do fundraising. Well, because all of us think we know who our community is and who our audience is. Wrong. Every time you're making a project, you have to also create the audience. And I mean, fundraising is not about money. Fundraising is about creating a community that didn't recognize itself before as a community. And every project is about the creation of a community, is about healing, creating connections, creating conversations that are missing, creating the missing person in somebody's life. That's fundraising. And it's worth more than money. And you're not going to create your audience through a marketing effort. You're going to create an audience because what you're doing matters to people's lives and they want to be there. And they want to support it because this is why they're on earth and they know that. And you're providing a missing piece in all of our lives. And the process of fundraising is that which is worth more than money. And again, I would just emphasize, Buddhism has the 4 immeasurables, right? Which is what we're really working with. We're not working with money. We never were working with money. We're working with what the Buddhists call the 4 immeasurables, which are something that you will never run out of because they exist in infinite quantity as well as quality. That would be compassion, generosity, courage, and love. You will never run out of any of those things, and those are the materials you are working with. And if you're fundraising in that direction, fundraising in the direction of courage, building more courage and reaching out into communities, searching for more courage. Hello. That's what we're talking about. And realizing more courage in yourself when you meet people who have truly had to be courageous. And you get over your cheap self. And also as an artist, your pathetic ideas. When you meet people who life has dealt painful blows. And you realize you have got to go way deeper. And your heart has to be way larger. And your commitment has to be solid. So I ask young artists, please don't make anything based on what you read in the newspaper, for God's sake. Go there, be there. Be with people. If you're going to make a show about something, be there, live with people. Become part of that community. If you want to tell a story, if it's not your story to tell, shut up. We have a nightmare epidemic of people telling stories that are not their story to tell. If you want to tell a story, you have to be with people in the middle of it and become part of that story. But more importantly now is you have to invite the people whose story it is to step forward and tell it. Coalition building. Expanding your range of friends, of people who are now part of your life and who your life is committed to. And not just say, I can tell everyone's story. You can feel it, but you can't tell it. It's one of the reasons why the operas of John Adams, I make the librettos out of historical documents, because in a multicultural world, I don't want to ventriloquize for anyone. I don't want to represent someone's voice who isn't my voice. I want an actual voice from a Chinese person in this moment in time, in that situation. I don't want to make up what they're saying. I want to hear what they said. And I want, in one evening, a diversity of voices, and I want those voices to be authenticated. And I want to hear not any kind of homogenous way of people speaking. I want to hear how differently people express themselves and why. Because people's life paths are so different, and therefore the expressions are so different. We do not need a homogenization of that. We actually need to get a more acute awareness of how different our experiences are before we're allowed to say we're all human. And creating that space of vulnerability and people feeling they have the right to speak on their terms is crucial. And at the same time, most people have never been involved in a larger project than their own project. And so one of the tasks that we have as artists is to contextualize everything we're doing, giving people a larger context than they've ever been allowed to work in or think about. When I say contextualize, part of that is really simple, because the news cycle, looking at things online, everything is now in the context of no context, to repeat George Tro's famous expression. So my freedom fighter is your terrorist, because we're both looking at the same gesture, but in a very different context. How the gesture is understood in context is really important. So what we have to do with every art project we create is create context around the work of art. No work of art can just speak by itself magically. Every work of art, the audience has to go through something that creates a context, so we can begin to recognize what's at stake. And as always, what we do in the arts is we're talking about and showing not the story, but the story behind the story, and the story behind that story, and the story behind that story. Because as you know from your own family, the real story has mostly never been told. Of Uncle Charlie and blah, blah, blah. It's not spoken about, and if it is mentioned, it's mentioned in a totally falsified version, because Aunt Betty isn't hearing it, and blah, 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 blah. And I would again just say, in your own family, you know what it means when someone doesn't feel they can say something aloud that they know and that they feel. What kind of violence that creates, what kind of tension that creates, and what it means that somebody sitting at the table doesn't feel they can speak. Absence of communication, shutting down an avenue of communication, creates violence. You know it from your family. And when somebody doesn't bother speaking because they know no one will even listen, they're so angry and alienated. What does it mean to create the conditions where the person who hasn't spoken feels they can speak? And someone will listen. So it's worth speaking. Or do we have to get to the level of, in order for you to acknowledge me, because you won't acknowledge me, I have to put a bomb in your car? Conflict and violence in this world are not political questions, they're cultural questions. And we have to begin to treat economic and political questions not as economic and political questions, but as cultural questions. Are people able to hear each other, acknowledge each other, recognize each other as equals? What does it take to create those structures of equality and those structures of equanimity, where you can roll with an insult instead of deciding to shoot someone? Equanimity. The spaciousness that we carry with us inside, and the spaciousness that we feel as a community, which is not to feel under threat every second, but to feel you have your own internal equilibrium and balance, and you're not going to lose it every time things get difficult. Equanimity. Equality and equanimity. This is our work here. Equanimity, the spaciousness to handle very painful topics without simply becoming reactive. Which is why the Greeks in their theater, which, as you know, every citizen had to attend the theater in Athens. The city council paid for your ticket if you couldn't afford it, even though it was roughly the price of a glass of beer. But if you voted, you had to go to the theater. Why? Because the Greeks knew that democracy was not going to work just by itself. There needed to be a maintenance function in which we were better informed about each other. And the Greeks deliberately chose tragedy as the medium. Everything that you're not proud of, how you treated the prisoners in the last war, your daughter's suicide, or a daughter killing her mother, things that can't even be discussed in the family. The idea that the Greeks got 5,000 people together on a hillside to talk about suicide in a family is because it doesn't matter who's on the Supreme Court. We can't legislate suicide away. And what does it mean now that once again we live in a time that is the single greatest amount of suicide in the world of any generation on earth? We're living in a time where young people don't want to be here. And where these exhilarating movements are going on of young people actively in the streets, actively living another way, actively choosing to move forward on their terms. Just to say very briefly, the beautiful thing about Greek democracy was, of course, it was perfect if you were a white male. The only people who couldn't vote or couldn't be citizens were women, children, foreigners, and slaves. For the record, the title of every Greek play is the name of a woman, a child, a foreigner, or a slave. The arts existed to make a space where people who could not speak in the Senate could be heard by every person who votes. and they had better speechwriters. And expressed themselves in dance and music and poetry in a way that becomes unforgettable. I'll just say one more thing quickly about the Greek theater that obsesses me is when you went to the Epidaurus, you took a 10-mile walk outside of town up into the mountains until you're finally overlooking the city and overlooking the ocean. You have this perspective. When you finally arrive at the sacred grounds, immediately to your right is the temple of Asclepius, where you were treated and your physical ailments were healed. You know, in front of pharmacies, the double snake twisting around, those were the snakes that lived there. And the snakes were there to treat your ailments, and you slept there overnight while the snakes worked on your ailments. In the morning, you had sacred meal at the Odeon, which of course was a concert hall and food. That combination of food and music as the completion of the healing process. Next to the Odeon was the Olympic Stadium, where sports were going full blast. What do the Olympics mean for the Greeks? I just want to say one thing about that, which is, yes, every local country, every country was invited to participate. But also the Greeks were incredible because their works treated mythology, these incredible Homeric, incredible epic heroes from Greek mythology were always at the center, frequently at the center of these plays. But what was so cool about having the Olympic Stadium right there was to say, see this young person, see these kids right here? These kids run faster than anyone ever did, particularly the heroes of the old days. These kids are faster. So there was no way, it's not about worshiping the past generations, it was the opposite. Having the Olympics right there said, no one has ever run this fast. And the Greek sculpture program went with it. There were sculptures of the sexiest, most beautiful teenagers. My God, those Greek statues, you're just dying for them because all of these sexy beings are there, standing there naked and gorgeous and glorious as what is better and more amazing than a teenager? The Greeks knew that, and instead of our war on youth, which we're engaged with, the Greeks had this amazing thing of saying, thank God for the next generation, thank God they're here, let's welcome them, let's admire how beautiful and gorgeous and smart and wise they are, and they are the future, thank God they're here. And then you went up the hill to the auditorium. Auditorium is a very important word. Greek architecture was about listening. As you know from those Greek theaters, you can hear the voice of one person. 5,000 people can hear it. How much architecture of listening do we have? We're all into the architecture of listening, and most buildings are deafening. You can hear nothing. What does it mean to create a culture of listening, a society of listening? Finally, let me just say, I'm working on a bunch of cool projects, but one of the things I'm doing right now is a production of Mozart's Idomeneo, an opera that Mozart wrote when he was 24, that is particularly cool because it's about the angry ocean. Climate change is the most important issue in front of us in so many ways and connects to so many of the other justice issues that we're dealing with. And I need to emphasize step one. Dear fabulous artists, is step one in making art is look at what is missing from the picture that's around you. And please, put it there. What's missing, go ahead and put it there. How to make art, 3 steps. Step number 1, imagine the world you want to live in. Step number 2, create that world. Step number 3, live in it. If something's missing in your life, something's missing in the society around you, please create it. That would mean justice. That would mean fairness. That would mean a way in which we live together. That would mean another kind of social network that is the internet before the internet. And if I could just say, for example, in Mozart's Idomeneo, it picks up at the end of the Homeric epics. I don't know why I'm so Greek tonight, but just to say, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, thought they were pretty amazing and were proud of themselves with the Trojan War, which they prosecuted in the most evil possible ways. But they thought they were really clever, and they won after, incredible bloodbath and all kinds of strange betrayals. And the Greeks got in their ships to go home, very proud of themselves. And the ocean said, "Oh, no, you don't." And the ocean stopped all of those ships and said, "Excuse me, there is a moral force in the universe, and it is now talking to you. And it is called the ocean. Please pay attention." Failure to notice will be lethal. Most civilizations before ours knew that the ocean was not just a thing, but a living being and a moral force. Recognizing what it is to live in a world of moral forces that are much bigger and more powerful than we are is step 1 of growing up. In the arts, one of the things we have to learn to do is represent those moral forces with their full force intact. We have a lot of amazing new technology we can use to do that, but there are other things that are not technologically and charged, but that are spiritually charged. And if I could just really say, the message of the arts is there will be no solution until the problem itself becomes the solution. That is to say, only gang members can end a gang war. That is to say, what we're really dealing with is a crisis of empowerment of the people who actually can move the planet forward. And instead of calling people criminals and terrorists, what will it mean? In the image of Mozart's last opera that he wrote when he was 35, which was a Nelson Mandela story of what does it mean that the most enlightened leader in the world comes out of 26 years in prison, knows what prison means, and then comes out and forms a government with the people who tried to kill him. That's Mozart's last opera, La Clemenza di Tito. And he does 3 things. He says, okay, first of all, round up the people who tried to kill me. They're brought to him. And he does 3 things with them. 1, he deals with their issues. 2, he invites them to join the government, because until they have both representation and responsibility, no one will ever be safe. And then 3, the process of reconciliation. What have we all done to each other? Can we understand where the wounds lie? Can we understand where the healing needs to happen? Can we understand where the damage has been done? And can we understand ourselves as beings that are capable of healing ourselves and each other? Dear students, I want to meet you later. Come find me. I want to hear what you're doing. Meanwhile, anyone who can stay for another few minutes, let's do a Q&A. And here are these microphones here. Let's get into whatever we need to get into, and let's get way into it. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you very much. There is the microphone right there. Hello.
Hi there. Thank you, Peter. My name's Erin.
Hi, Erin.
I'm a student here. And my question goes back to when you were talking about making art based off what you read in the newspaper. And I think there's a lot of art that is that pick and choose political art, detached from the artist's like internal curiosities in their life and also from the issue. But the detached art is hard to talk about or to have more complex discussions on it because of the sensitive nature of the issues and the black and white binary of like good and evil that we tend to view and categorize things through. And it becomes like a dismissal of those missing chain links. And so I'm wondering what methods of critique and dialogue that you suppose that we do while dealing with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Everyone, just to say, you heard the question. For me, it's really, really crucial. I taught for 3 years at the Berkeley School of Journalism just because I wanted to get artists and journalists together. And I'm not really dissing journalism, but I'm saying journalism by itself is not enough. And I need artists to encourage journalists to write more personally, and I need journalists to encourage artists to get their facts right. And to me, the combination would be very, very important, that both sides, both fields empower each other. But I would also just say the important thing we learn in theater, the important thing you learn in art that is rarely present in so much writing and so much reportage that meets us, is that for something to be true, its opposite has to be equally true. And mostly what we're shown all day long is propaganda. Somebody simply wants to convince you of something, and they're going to line up everything that's on the side of what they want to convince you. As artists, we have to actually tell all sides of a story. We have to tell the unpopular part. We have to tell the difficult part. We have to talk through the painful stuff. We have to talk about the stuff that isn't how you wanted it and never was how you wanted it. And we have to talk about the fact that nobody's hands are clean. Because until we do that, we're not meeting as equals. Equality means we all also have to imagine all of our faults, all of our mistakes, all of our slight lies and huge lies. And we can't just see the world the way we would like to see it. We have to see it the way it is, which means reporting on the opposite side. So the great thing about Oedipus Rex is that, you know, the guy's the smartest person on earth and so stupid you can't believe it. And there's always this double edge to everything because life is a double-edged thing, minimum. And so our task as artists is not to create propaganda, but exactly to put forward difficult, complex truths, which can only really be done if you're working with communities, because communities are by nature complex, and your friends are the only people who are going to keep you honest, who say, excuse me, that's not true. And so how to create work in a very real, responsive community and create work that empowers a community to share difficult truths. That's very, very important. And that liberates you from this nightmare of having to claim this or that, because until you claim both, and more than both, none of us are in any real place. And again, equality is just to say everybody enters the picture as a human being, which means we've all have horrible flaws and made huge mistakes. And the deeper we acknowledge the mistakes, the more each of us has a desire to turn a new leaf in our life. And what we're here for is to give people the possibility to have a new page, We're telling the history so we can turn the page and start a new page. But we can't start that new page until we've been honest about how we got here. Most people don't want that, and the difference between a work of art and the usual, I won't say usual, but the way we're so used to receiving information is we're used to receiving information from a single point of view and from a single author and a single authorial authority of a great author. And as I mentioned to you earlier, for me, I feel it's a little late in history for a univocal approach. And I feel the more rich your process is, the more what you're able to put forward in an artwork is dimensional and has facets that is going to keep it alive in a way that it becomes a discussion point and a turning point for people in a community. Yes.
Are you going to?
Oh, over here?
I'll listen to you first.
Check it out.
Okay, we're going to be like that.
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Sophie.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking to us. So, a mentor of mine has kind of like given me this mantra, I guess, that, you know, she's in her process. I'm in my process. And I've struggled with that a lot, seeing people as dynamic beings rather than in that moment as they are and like frozen. And that's something as a person, as a young person, that I've been learning. And I've been learning to like not freeze, and like no one is exempt from that, whether that's like some random person I just saw yesterday at the CVS or like my favorite professor. Like nobody is exempt from that. And I'm really curious as to like how your process has coalesced, because, you know, you're kind of iconic, but like obviously, like that's not something that just happens. And you're very optimistic, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, no, I don't, like, it can't have always been that way. Like, you came from somewhere, and it doesn't, I mean, you don't have to give us all the details if you don't want to, but like, I would love to hear that. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Bless you. Bless you. Just to say, first of all, one of the great things as a badge of honor in my life is to have been attacked for almost 20 years in the New York Times once a month. And to have a bunch of people hate what you're doing is very constructive, because you don't get some big idea of yourself as important is half the people hate what you're doing every day. And you just live with that. And for some people, I am the worst thing imaginable. They've never met me and maybe not even seen what I'm doing, but they're furious. And so always to have a bunch of furious people out there helps. And kind of ad hominem attacks. And you think, oh, okay. Because most things that ever were important in the world were attacked. And you have to actually put yourself in solidarity with whatever is being attacked at a certain moment. And that is sobering and humbling. And you have to say the real people were attacked far worse than me. But it gives you humility, and it immediately puts you on the side of the voices that are not being heard or being denied. And you're in very good company, usually. And I have spent my life in a lot of amazing places with amazing people, learning through very difficult situations. And I would just say, you know, when your sister's on cocaine or whatever people are going through, it's a terrible moment, but it's also a really important moment. And I would say most of us do our learning painfully. I wish we knew how to learn some other way, but human beings keep not learning anything until they hit the wall. And you tell yourself every day you're going to change, but you don't change until you hit the wall. and until something's a total disaster and you finally say, I guess we have to do something else. And for me, I respect that form of learning. And again, why I think theater was invented is to give people a way to hit the wall without actually destroying themselves. Which is why, for me, middle-brow theater is so irritating. Because I think theater is meant to test the limits of life and death and genuine danger that all of us are facing. And if I don't get that level from theater, I'm very irritated. And if I feel art being made from a comfortable and self-regarding place, I am very irritated. Because that's a delusional place. And what sobers you up is to be in trouble. And to me, so much of the most important art is created by people in a very difficult place, in a very difficult situation, for reasons that are so urgent and where they can't lie. The truth is so present. And that's what I think we're trying to share with the other human beings. And for two reasons, one of which is when you're in that painful place, you don't want to be in that place alone. So the practice of the arts is to invite other people to join you there, so you're not alone. Because in fact, none of us are ever alone and ever have been alone. Even when you think you're alone, you're bringing all these people into the room with you who you're still in a debate with. You're still talking to your mother. You're still talking, all that is still going on. We're carrying these debates on with us every minute. So how can we create the conditions to just stop and be real with ourselves and a few friends? That's the process. And the other process is to pick things you're really scared of and that you don't understand. And that's my rule. I only work on things I do not understand. Because if I can sit in a room alone and understand something, then why bother? And I try and pick things that I need to invite really interesting people into a room and really diverse people. Because until I do that, I don't feel we have a chance to understand something. So you deliberately pick your weakest subjects and the things you can't deal with. And that's your agenda. And then you try and deal with those things with help from amazing people. A little bit like life. Thank you.
Before my question, I wanted also to thank you, like everyone else is, because it was an exciting and moving presentation, like your work is also always exciting and moving for me, so I'm grateful. But I had a question. It surprised me when you said near the end that you weren't planning on being so Greek tonight, because it felt like that was very much the way the whole presentation was organized, and I was thinking the whole time about, I'm not from stamps, I'm a lay person. And so I was just thinking the whole time about what one learns as a student about Aristotelian poetics, and it felt like you were talking about radical interventions where you were doing political work by so radically changing things, like putting real journalists on stage to read the chorus, or bringing kids from detention centers to look at us, and then introduce them to the Minister of the Interior who gives somebody a visa. But I was wondering about the complexity of those kind of poetic effects that you were describing throughout, the uncontrollable aspect of that complexity, like if that interior minister is Kickel, is the one in Austria, is from the far-right Freedom Party. You say
He was, yes.
He was
the guy. He was Mr. Lock 'em Up.
Yeah, no, and the far-right, that's who it was. And while, you save a life, you save the world, but it's also true, and I didn't know the case until you mentioned it now, and I'm kind of an Austrianist, so I should have. But if he then uses it, for political capital to show that we're not so bad or we welcome some immigrants, I don't know he did any such thing, but if it has then effects other than you intended, or I was there during that the current refugee crisis when it first bubbled up there, and they did Jelinek's Schutzbefohlenen, which is her.
It was that era, yes.
Yeah, and the audience was so excited because of what was happening outside and the mirror of what she was doing in the text, which referred to an earlier refugee crisis, but people felt so helpless, and that there is something complicated, right, about that kind of catharsis where you feel like you're doing something by buying a $100 ticket and seeing this Jelinek play, and you're on the right side of things but can do nothing. So those kinds of complications is what I wondered.
Thank you, thank you. I really just have to emphasize that control is the one thing we don't have an illusion about. And certainly as a director, you don't imagine you're controlling anything. The only thing you can do with any human being is issue invitations. The way people take the invitation is the way they take it. And that itself is going to tell a story. And you have to let that be the story. Meanwhile, what we do is give people an experience they wouldn't otherwise have. The Interior Ministry would never have met those Nigerians. And so you have an actual experience you wouldn't have. And for me, most people, as the Buddhists and Hindus say, there is no such thing as evil, there's just ignorance. People have not been exposed. People don't have a wider range of connection. And so one of the things I think we're here to do as artists is expose people and create the meeting points that are missing in the society. What people do with that is not, we can't begin to organize that. On the other hand, there was an actual meeting. That for me is very powerful and is different from people talking about each other without having met. So that's at least a step. And I would just say none of these issues are going to get easier, and they're not going to be solved quickly. And people can use something in any way they choose to use it. But I really do believe that in the arts you make a difference by one moment of truth. And that we're here to create one more moment of truth on earth. And that moment of truth is going to go on to sow the seed of something that we can't even imagine. And what I had to learn all the time from doing theater is you think, oh, right, compared to television, nobody sees it or hears it. But in fact, 40 years later, somebody comes up to me in the street and says, I saw this thing you did. I can't ever forget it. It's like, what? It goes deep. And I think the difference between the news program is it doesn't go that deep, and therefore you forget it faster. Whereas if I could say what I'm doing is planting a seed that is going to grow the rest of somebody's life in whatever soil exists in their heart. And that's their tree, not mine. And I have to respect that and honor that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ariel.
Hi, Marielle. Nice to see you.
So clearly your art is all about seeing each other as equal, breaking bread together, and I think that's really beautiful and everything. But I was wondering if you ever think there's a time when art should or can or should draw a line, and that art can be direct action, art can be aggressive, and maybe not humanizing someone and not breaking bread with them and refusing, and creating art that's really just directly challenging them and doing something that's just really aggressive. Is that art valid too in your eyes?
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Marielle. That's intense. I mean, for me, we live with enough violence, misunderstanding, finger pointing, and carrying on that I don't feel I have to add to that. There's already enough people accusing each other of everything. So what I try or the way I describe it, is it's like talking to your dad when he understands nothing. And he's making the whole family miserable, but he thinks he's saving everyone. How do you talk to your father? If you just confront him, everything will be way worse. You have to find a way to talk to your father in a way that doesn't humiliate him, that brings him back into the family, that means we can all be together in another way, and that mends whatever has been broken. And to me, the work of repair is the work right now. Or again, the strengthening of relationships that never existed and that needed to have existed between communities. And that work is primarily positive work and healing work, and not j'accuse. And for me, the reality is always more complicated than this is the oppressor and this is the oppressed. It's just not an interesting way for anyone to see themselves in either category. And so I don't want to say, oh, right, you are oppressed, feel like a victim, and I don't want to be, you're the oppressor, feel like you're the monster. Because until the monster learns something else, and I don't want anybody to think of themselves as a victim ever, you want to create way more interesting images for people to see themselves in each other. And so I tend to work in a different way. I mean, I did, when I was younger, make some shattering work, which I haven't done for the last 25 years, just because the world got so violent and the level of disinformation and suspicion and inability to trust anyone got so extreme. And once the war on terror came along, I just said, I can't be part of that. I can't be part of blaming that group of people for all this. That's the war on terror. And it's, as always, exaggerated and actually creates more injustice. So I'm trying not to use those high-handed politics that assume I'm right and someone else is wrong, because that's not an interesting way to meet anyone. And we're going to have to meet. And until, as I said, the problem becomes the solution, until we can work together with the very people who are creating a problem, the problem I don't think will go away. So I think the great thing about art is people are willing to engage it. You know, the Minister of the Interior said yes, and said, I'll be there on Tuesday night, and came. So to actually have a conversation with somebody is better than not having a conversation, I think. But let's see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name's Dennis Powers. The piece of your work that I've really enjoyed since I first saw it on the Berlin Philharmonic's Digital Concert Hall is the St. John Passion.
Oh, bless you.
Could you talk about your vision for that work and how it relates to your staging of these Greek tragedies or operas?
I've actually just come from doing the St. John Passion in Berlin this last weekend. And so we're revisiting it and continuing to live with it. And for me, part of it is, of course, creating a community project through the chorus, which Bach does really, really powerfully. And what it means that Bach takes these ancient forms of a chorus that is recalling these events that are both hideous and tragic and grotesque, and also a path to some kind of large salvation and transformation. For me, what I love is Bach's structures of these poetic arias, which usually have instruments accompanying them, the obbligato. I love Bach's image of a human being in crisis who's joined by an oboe or two oboes or two flutes. Just now in Berlin, I made a new version of the first soprano aria, which is with two flutes And if you know the St. John Passion, it's always performed with lovely fluttering flutes. The text is, I walk every step with joy with you, Jesus. And it's very decorative and very lovely. It's officially lovely music. And this time, Camilla Tilling, who sings the soprano role, her father died 3 days before we started rehearsal. And in the middle of rehearsals, we had to go. She had to leave for the funeral, and she only came back for the performances. And I couldn't, in the state she was in, just let this flute music be pretty. And she was having a vocal issue because she was literally choked up. And so we slowed the tempo down. And you could hear the bass line. Bach is really good at writing what is called a walking bass. This beautiful walking bass line, which makes, like air on a G string, where this bass line just keeps going in this infinite, beautiful, loping path. But the bass line is broken, hesitant, arrhythmic, and you realize, of course, what Bach is painting in the bass line is not, I'm walking with Jesus, but is the road to Calvary, is carrying the cross, and is somebody stumbling in pain. And so the text, I make every footstep with joy, is about carrying the cross and being in extreme agony and having to find joy in every footstep. Which then meant the flutes, which then begin to slow down once you acknowledge this is how the bass line is moving. The flutes become not decorative kind of butterfly patterns, but the exhaustion of breathing, of carrying the cross. And this going up and up and up and up until you're exhausted, and then you have to keep going. Anyway, it's on the Digital Concert Hall, I think, in 2 weeks. See what you think of it. But what is great about living with this music of Bach is every time you come to it, it reveals something new with whatever life you're bringing to it. The music itself responds. And so I think this version of St. John Passion that we've just done this week, and if you're in London next week, we're going to continue doing it. London, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Luxembourg, we'll do the St. John Passion in the next 2 weeks. And we'll just keep working on it. But it's one of those pieces that, Bach is genuinely life work. You never exhaust it. And Bach always amazes you and surprises you with how relevant and how resilient and how insightful it is. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
My name's Patricia.
Hello, Patricia.
You said something about people who come up to you eons later with stories about how you changed their life or something that you did change their life. And I'm like, well, I'm that person, and I have one of those stories. So 30 years ago this year, PBS was broadcasting your Così fan tutti. And we were watching it in an apartment in Chicago and had to run to a meeting of the board of the Feminist Writers Guild. And I had no babysitter, and I took my 7-year-old daughter with me. And she got to the house where we were having the meeting, and the person said, "Oh, a child, I have cable TV," which was new then. You can watch anything that you want to watch. What do you want to watch? And my daughter said, "Mommy, what was that opera we were just watching on TV?" And everyone went, "What?" And we watched everything we could find of yours. We watched that one over and over. She became a student in the School of Art and Design here. She is one of the Stamps alumni. and she has, she's part of a show that's opening at the Ann Arbor Art Center at the beginning of April, and falling in love with your work was part of what shaped her into the person who has followed that path. Thank you.
My God, Patricia, my God, thank you. Bless you, bless you. Thank you. I just would say, for any of the students who are probably gone, long gone, but just to say, hi, you guys. That piece I made when I was 21 with friends, and we had no money, but and because we had no money, it meant we could work till 4 in the morning. So no one would stop us, and that Così fan tutte is something that was made at 4 in the morning. And you can see the characters going to these extreme places that you don't see in a nice opera version, because the opera house rehearsal time ends at 5 in the afternoon. And what it meant that we, as young people, we could just say, how do I feel this? And go very, very far together. So we worked on that Così for 10 years. Every single year we came back to it. And we just said, okay, this part was very funny last year. Let's make it sad this year. Or we would say, this was just super ironic, but now let's make it sincere. And so we did that every year for 10 years. We changed almost every aria. So by the time they're done, to answer another question earlier, every aria was tragic and funny and sad and because we tried all of those colors across 10 years. And so you couldn't reduce it ever. Thank you. And tell me your daughter's name. Zara. Bless you, Zara. Thank you, Patricia. Over here.
Wait, Peter. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, and I wish we could stay here all night. I'm letting you know now, I have the duty of clearing the house in 8 minutes. You have 4 people standing up here.
Great.
So just have that in mind.
It's all beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. First of all, after hearing some of the people speak, I'm very honored to be in your presence. I unfortunately hadn't heard from you before, and I kind of came in here because I thought it was Peter Sellars with an E. Just kidding.
He's funnier.
I'm kidding. Yeah, it's all right. And this is Women's History Month, and so I have a lot of questions going on. But one is about, Mozart had a sister. And this is Women's History Month, so I just want to, wonder if you've done any of her works. But, you talked about a lot of people who have, just been dealt a cold blow in life. I'm one of those people. I'm recovering. I lost my job as a teacher in Detroit in 2012. Ended up on the streets. And I really didn't have before that an idea of how people suffer on the streets. And I've really felt disconnected from them. Now that I'm a part of them, I feel part of the community. They're my friends. But I've gotten a lot of insight into some of the crises that are going on right here. You talk about kids who are, kind of marginalized, kids who are detached from their parents. Not in detention camps in this, in this country, but bureaucracy keeps them just totally detached from their parents for years. They're caught up in that, and a lot of our kids sleep outside. I mean, it's just really tragic. So you have been so powerful, as I know a lot of people are, but I appreciate your work. What about some of that energy to kids who are in foster care, and why do you think that hasn't happened? On a lot of levels, even in the media. I feel shut out of the media. I write. Have you heard of a street paper before? What have you heard of?
I have it back there in the dressing room.
Did you get ours?
Totally, it's right there.
Did you get our special edition?
It's in the dressing room.
Oh, the special edition?
Well, I'll
okay,
check.
let me tell you, the special edition gives a platform for women who've experienced homelessness, because in the whole women's movement, there's not a lot of inclusion, and we aren't there. We aren't included, so that's what this does. And I just feel a lack of inclusion, I really do, and I'm just wondering if you can tell me how, in what, 4 minutes left, 2 minutes left? Sorry. How you might be able to, help that, create awareness and a lack of, there's a lot of fear of people. People pass me on the streets every day, and they're running from me, and I'm right here in the country, so we got to kind of bring
Thank you
some
so
awareness
much
here.
for speaking so beautifully.
And I do have a women's edition for you.
Oh, thank
leave.
you.
Yeah.
Step one, keep talking to everyone. Step one, please keep talking. In Los Angeles, where I live, we have a group that I've been working with for 30 years now called LAPD, Los Angeles Poverty Department. And it's a company on Skid Row that works with homeless and formerly homeless people for 30 years now, making the most powerful art imaginable. And it is thrilling. They have frequently toured America. Their tours are called LAPD Inspects America. And it is very powerful when people who have been homeless or are homeless can speak and have a powerful forum to do that. The other thing I would just emphasize is the process of becoming part of an art-making community also changes people's lives, because one of the things about being homeless is you have no one to talk to. And what does it mean when you're suddenly part of a group of people who depend on you and who you can depend on? That changes every part of your life. So, yes, this is the most important work to be done, and the work to be done in foster care is huge. What I'm happy to say, it's not a secret. People are realizing it's a disaster, and it has to be approached in a new way now in a new generation.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do. As a former teacher, I want to, of course, focus on kids in transitional living.
Let's do it.
And that's where I'm putting all my energy. So thank you for hearing me.
Deal.
Enjoy
Done.
meeting
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
More power to you. And over here, we're loud. Yes, please, please, please. Hi.
Hi, I'm Taylor.
Taylor, hello. I'm Peter. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So I
Just
know
before the world ends.
Yes, it seems like it only got 4 minutes to save the world. So you talked a lot about all of the successes you've had in changing people's minds. I'm more interested in times you failed, maybe, and what you've learned from that experience.
Well, failure is a daily thing. It's many times a day. It's like a lot of failure before lunch, a lot of failure after lunch. Then there's a new kind of failure that comes after dinner. You know, failure is what you're living with every moment. You're not the person you want to be. For me, it's like the person we all imagine ourselves as is not who any of us are. And so for me, one of the most important things is every time you meet anyone, realize they're just like you are. They're not the person they wanted to be or how they imagined themselves. And they're betraying everything they believe in all the time. And so you want to judge them, but you don't realize they're judging themselves more harshly than you are judging them. So for me, the task is every time you meet someone, how do you create the space for them to get a little closer to being the person they wanted to be? Do we have time for one more? Yes, one more. Quick, quick, quick. Step right up.
Okay, you can do that.
What happened after when the kids shaked people's hands and some stepped back and some spit on them? What happened after?
Dinner. That's what's so cool, is you think you're never going to see those kids again, and then you go to the next thing and you're at a table with them. So we're actually having dinner together, and nobody's going anywhere, and the food is delicious. Then that creates a second chance, which is what we all need every day.